Awesome. Welcome, everyone. I'll start in a few seconds. All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another Tech Tuesday. My name is Francis, and today I'll be talking about implementing non-standard UI layouts, anything outside of the normal box layout that you might come across in a project. After the stream, if anyone has any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, and then I'll take some time afterwards to look through them and answer what I can. Also going into this, I'll assume you know the basics of HTML and CSS. I'm not doing anything too fancy here. I'm more explaining concepts. And this project itself isn't based on any specific framework. I'm just kind of going to be covering universal principles you can apply to any project, any framework, any language really, that'll eventually output this web page. So yeah. A few points I'll be covering is when to use relative and absolute positioning and how that works, some use cases of Flexbox, and how to plan your layout to make it a lot easier to build when you actually need to create something based off of design. So we can get started. Here I have the design that was given to me. It has an intro header area with an image, some text, and a menu, and then here we have a badge and some text, and here we have a display of products. It's all paint products, and they, as you can see here, scroll a bit horizontally. So how do we start actually taking this and bringing it into fruition? So the best way that I like to go about it is identify the elements. What do we have here? Obviously, we can see the elements that we can select in XD, but it might go a bit further than that. So let's go into the first section. The first section that we can kind of see would be this introduction section. We have this wobbly effect here. We have some paint splatters. We have this badge that says the eco-friendly, and just a bit of information about the product. And I've broken this down into individual sections that we'll go through. So how do we start? Let's always start from the top. So what is the most basic breakdown of what we have here? We can kind of see that we have two sections here, and it will break down into roughly this row that's in the center of the page. And then in a row, we can have two columns. So let's maybe take that and split it down here. That's fine. And we can kind of base off, we can assume maybe this is 33% width, this is 66. And yeah, after we've taken this level, let's go one level deeper. We can see that this must be an image provided here. And we can see the paint splatters and the text. Let's block this out. This will be our text, and this must be positioned in the center of this column. One level deeper, we have the paint splatters. Now, these do seem like the toughest part from the start. They're kind of just randomly placed on the page, but they aren't actually. Once you break it down, you can see they're really just in the top corner here and in the bottom left corner here. So once we've identified all of this, how do we go about positioning it in a way that it will also be eventually mobile responsive? The first section, fairly simple. We create a row. The easiest way to create percentage-based columns is to use Flexbox. In this case, Flexbox will be used to give this one a 33% width, this one 66, and they'll easily stack next to each other. Then inside of each column, we're going to start by setting the column's positioning to relative. So every child inside of that column will be in relation to the column itself. So when you try to position something inside the column, it will take the column's coordinates into account, not the entire screen, which would happen if we omit that property. So let's start with this paint splatter. A bit of understanding or basics of background on absolute positioning. I'll start with this simple example. By default, absolute positioning will work off of the top left corner of an element. So by default, if you specify let's say just 1, 1, it'll be here. If you specify 100 and this is a 100 pixel wide element, it'll be here, and then same for the other axis. So if we specify something at -10, -10, it'll actually be in the negative space in relation to that element. And I'm sure you can kind of see what we're going to do in this case. So in this scenario, we are positioning top 0 and left 0. Here, what if we set the anchor point to the right? Well, then the 0, 0 will be in the top right, and to the left and to the bottom will be the increasing amount. So if we use -10, -10 in this case, it'll be on the completely other side. The reason to use the correct anchor point is when you start to move and change the width of the parent object, you want this to be always anchored to the same position. If we try to position this paint splatter from the left, it would kind of shift all over the place if this ever had to shrink or grow. So for this one, we're going to position it in top 0, right 0. And then we're just going to move it a bit into the negative space. So obviously we don't want it in the complete corner, so let's maybe move it up -50 px from the top. Same will apply for this one here. Let's maybe start it at left 0, bottom 0, and then just bring it out a bit. So maybe this might be -20, this might be -10. And that actually is a very easy breakdown of this section. Once you break down like this, it's a lot easier and a lot more bite-sized. You can take much more bite-sized chunks and complete this section. Yeah, let's move on. Here we have all of the products, and like I said, it's in a horizontal carousel. So let's go from the top again. We obviously have this carousel that spans the entire area here, and it should overflow and scroll on the y-axis. Oh, x-axis, sorry. So that's our first element. Our next element would be this product, and then we'll break down the product as we go further in. So let's go to that. As well, this one looks fairly complex at the start, but it actually isn't once you break it down. Even though it has a lot of curves and things overlapping, it does actually break down to a simple square. So let's start blocking that out. So I guess this would be the first obvious element. And then the next one would be the name. So from here, once you do this, it's fairly easy to identify that this should be in the bottom left. This absolutely positioned product name should be in the bottom left to the relevant parent, the relative parent. Same for the price, bottom left, but let's just move it a bit into the negative pixel space from this anchor point. And the same for this add to cart button. It's still, we're going to anchor it off the bottom left, but let's just move it even further down, since it will always be this distance from the product. The next thing to tackle would be the image here. Let's say you get given images like this that might not always just be a square. How would you position this inside the container? The easiest way to do this specifically for images is to use a small trick, and you can easily apply this to a class. In this example, let's position it to the left 50% and to the right 50%. At this stage, it should be somewhere around this position. We can then use the translate property in CSS to move it 50% backwards and to the top of its own dimensions when you use percentage. So that way it will be perfectly in the center of whatever you specify the class. The one thing to note about that trick is that for text, it doesn't work too well. And especially for things where it might cause some sub-pixel values, it might become a bit blurry. So it's best just to keep this specifically for images. And the only remaining thing in this product is this bit of scratchy paint effect. And that's simply just the background image on this parent container with some border radius. So that as well, nothing too fancy, just the background image. So let's assume that then this is done, and we move to here. What is left? Well, we have to do the zigzag effect. So this is where Flexbox comes into play. With Flexbox, we can evenly space these and then also align each item in the flexbox however we want. So in this case, I'm going to use a CSS selector of nth of every type, and we can specify odd or even. And then in this example, every odd product should be aligned to the top or bottom, depending on which one you choose. So here, this one's aligned to the bottom, align this flex item to the bottom, and then by default, it will align to the top. So yeah, that's a very simple breakdown of this section. And right, let's continue. So at this stage, we have the site. The header is fairly self-explanatory. We've gone down through this. We know how to do these paint splatters, and we know how to do this horizontal product scrolling area. Obviously now, what if we decide to make this for mobile? I think we know we're going to run into some issues how we're doing it currently. So let's start taking a look. On a small laptop, it looks fine, but as we slowly decrease the size, you will see that we start to run into some issues. And as we decrease down to a thin or 2:1 phone resolution roughly, you can see this really isn't suitable for mobile. So what can we do to easily fix this? So it is best to take a methodical approach to your mobile responsiveness fixing up. I think my step one would be to identify the elements with the issue. So, or identify elements with issues. So see which elements actually are not really suitable for mobile, and then see how you would fix them. So some common causes could simply just be font size. That's a very simple fix. Could be some overflow like we see here and here. Stuff isn't really working too well, overflow here. Or sometimes you have items with fixed width causing problems. If the width of the element is specified more than the device size, you're going to run into overflow. So we're going to go through each mobile item and identify some issues in the order that I said earlier. So for this simple fix, it's just some font size. This menu at the top, we would need to see, can we style this or do we have to make a new element? Normally with menus, it is easiest just to make a new element. I don't think we can salvage this in any way. So we would hide this and just make a new element that would be shown only in the mobile resolutions. This section, if you haven't been giving a design and you just have to assume certain things should just stack, like I have, this should probably just stack. So this column should come to the top and this one should fall to the bottom. And then we need to fix up these paint splatters. And some issues here that we can see, this is obviously too large for a phone. You're not really getting what you should, and there's some clipping there. So let's go and apply the fixes, and I'll run you through how I did them. So this is the fixed result. Step one here was adjusting this text size. So for this section, I said earlier we created a flex box with those percentage widths. And the advantage here of using flexbox in this case is if you know an element needs to stack on top of each other, it's various columns or whatnot, it is very easy to use flexbox because then you can just change the display of the parent, the row, to block, and then everything would just stack on top of each other. I find that's a lot easier than trying to use, percentage widths floating to the right or tables. You can just instantly swap from something that was broken to something that looks fine with one property change. So that's a very useful tip if you know that your columns are going to need to stack on mobile. The other changes here is just being the paint splatters. So we've adjusted their positioning on mobile and gave them a bit of opacity to keep it the same look and feel of this design. And the same with here, luckily we didn't run into major overflow issues because this scrolls horizontally. So what we've done here is just reduce the size slightly and just allowed more to fit into the screen at once. However, no changes were made to any of the positioning. We've simply just scaled it down slightly. So by doing it in a structure in a smart way from the start, we avoided doing any work on these besides just reducing some of the spacing. So I'm just going to run you through a quick example for something else just to make it more relevant and not just for this project. Here we have a section with some text and a few pictures. We can just take it from the top. Here's a row. We can kind of see that this breaks down into two. Yeah, and this also roughly is the same size. So this parent can just be a flex box, and then we can space evenly the items inside of it. And then, like we did here, we can just detect that, this probably should be anchored to the parent. Absolutely position this just slightly into the negative of the relative parent. And yeah, so something that might look a bit difficult at first actually is very simple once you break it down and plan it like this. So yeah, that kind of covers most of it. It isn't a very large website. It's just this product page and the introduction section, but I think it highlights a few important areas and kind of common blocks that might be used in a site. So a few main takeaways. I think it's very important to do a methodical approach to building your elements, taking it from this design and almost going in reverse, going back to a wireframe and planning it from a wireframe into how you're going to build it. And then, yeah, always going from the top, just seeing how you can go from the simplest possible parent element, in this case the row, and just going one by one down the chain, just breaking it down further and further, and then just almost zooming in as you go through to see how you can break it down. And in cases like these, just seeing where the child sits and in relation to the parent, how should it anchor and how should it, or should it even be a child of the parent? Should it be a separate element? Blocking it out like this really helps to see if that's what you need to do. And then, like I've shown here with the very quick responsiveness fixes, using the correct properties for your needs makes life a lot easier. This is very quick to make this responsive, simply because I used properties that were easy to swap for the needs of this project. So that's also something important to think about, is to take into account, the future of the mobile responsiveness that you need to build towards, and use properties that are suitable to easily change over. So yeah, that's the overall kind of methodology that I follow, to kind of just break down something and implement it as quickly as I can and as easy as I can. Yeah, and thank you all very much for watching. Does anyone have any questions? Cool. Thank you, guys. I hope I had some helpful tips to share for whatever projects you might need to do or use these on. Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.